bellies of death for MedTech companies. From the ideation of a new medical device, only 20% make it to actually approval to enter the market. And in the next phase of commercialization, another 70% fail to be successful in the sales and promotion of their products. And after 5 years, only 30% of those companies remain. And we want to change that. We want to help MedTech companies to avoid the most commonly made failures. We want to help them through our advice, with our expertise, and with these kind of webinars. So moving to the webinar topics, we have a lot to cover in this meeting because there is a lot that comes to play when you launch innovative products to the market. We will look at market needs, clinical gaps, regulatory approval, building clinical and economic evidence, the market entry strategy, what you do with stakeholders, how do you train them, how do you do marketing and promotion, and then post-launch follow-up. This will take around 40-45 minutes, and we will then close the recording and move into a Q&A. If in the meantime you already have a question, share it in the chat, and maybe we answer it right then, and otherwise we answer it later on in the Q&A. The next slide will come back at every topic. This is the product life cycle, very, very simplified, from the ideation to prototyping, the various design phases that you have until approval, and then the commercialization. With every topic that we touch, we will indicate where in the product life cycle the topic that we are discussing applies. So without further ado, let's move to the first part. When you have the idea for a new product, it starts not only with the technical aspects, with the clinical aspects or the biological aspects, it starts also with conducting market research. And most ideas are based on assumptions, and you need to validate those assumptions. And the role of key opinion leaders is crucial in this phase of the business. And maybe, Alain, you can talk to how can you involve key opinion leaders already in that very early stage?
Yeah, sure, Marcel, thank you. Yes, as I said before, I'm happy to share with you, and again, feel free to comment, feel free to disagree with me. But what I've experienced the last couple of years, let's say the last 35 years in this MedTech industry, the successful launch of device starts even prior than you basically do your R&D process. It starts with an idea from, generally speaking, from an engineer / a physician. And then you think, well, could be ideal, could be good, could not be good. So it's important, extremely, I would even say crucial, that basically you conduct your market research and basically to identify, is there an unmet clinical or technical need? Because there is nothing worse than there is no idea that is stupid. All ideas could be good. But the whole point is it going really to serve either the physician, or would it be less expensive, as an example? But it has to be successful in one aspect or the other. And if you don't preliminarily, proactively think about it really wisely, I can tell you, I have seen, by the way, the topic we are covering could be seen as a topic for the startups. But let me tell you right away, I have seen major, super well-established companies that I won't give you the name. Of course, you have those names in your mind, I'm sure, that have been failing launching either new device or new technologies because they probably underestimated really what are the market needs. And we talk about immediately clinician, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because when you start with a clinician, it's already a beautiful way to engage the discussion. It's a long-lasting process. And certainly, as an example, for a startup, it doesn't mean necessarily that those guys have extensive and long-lasting relationship with a lot of physicians. So it's good to start. Generally, those guys are extremely open-minded to receive these kind of new things. And it will be a beautiful, let's say, opportunity for those companies to start the discussion with clinicians Of course, beside the clinician, you have to think about the healthcare providers, because they're going to be, of course, very, very important to validate together with the clinicians, basically, the expectations you have with your device.
So if I can summarize that, Alain, what you're saying is already when you have the idea, it's based on a perceived need of the market, list all the assumptions that you have and try to find key opinion leaders, doctors that are actually treating the patients to validate your assumptions and to validate also your assumptions on the market size and how attractive your product is at that very early stage.
And last but not least, Marcel, very important to assess and to understand the competitive landscape. Is there anyone already on the market with something that could look different but address the same indication as an example? Are you going to be more expensive, less expensive? What kind of benefit are you going to bring? It's important, to basically prevent. I'm not saying that if you, let's say, I have had the opportunity to launch beautiful new device in the market the last couple of years, and those devices were more expensive than others. But at the end, it's important that you preliminary, as early as possible, you think about it and you adjust basically your approach to the market to avoid that you're going to be facing barriers right at the time where you're going to launch your device and say, oh, wait a minute, I really don't know how to react. Very importantly, so assessing, understanding, and accordingly prepare your launch already at a time where you are not even with a design freeze.
All right. So if we look to the life cycle of a product, what you're saying, and I think you can see my mouse already here at the point where the idea is you should start looking at these kind of aspects, but I'm sure that you need to follow that during the rest of the life cycle of the product. Let's move to the next topic, which is navigating regulatory approval. This is a big hurdle for a lot of companies as well. And it starts, of course, with the moment that you have an idea, that you also identify what is the regulatory approval pathway. And a crucial thing here to keep in mind is to start with what is the intended use of the device, because the intended use will determine your regulatory pathway as well. And what I recently learned from Karen Deep, one of the RA influencers on LinkedIn, is also come up with backup strategies for different approaches, because your approach might not be accepted by the authorities. So prepare a very solid registration pathway, and obtain pre-submission guidance from the experts, and identify and implement clinical trials. And Alain, you have done a lot of work on clinical trials as well. Can you tell a little bit about your experience in relation with the regulatory approvals?
Absolutely. We just discussed about, of course, implementing or developing a clinical trial program. Fair enough. You're not going to be able to do that if you don't start with basically having engagement with regulatory bodies as early as possible. It's important whether you target FDA, whether you target PMDA for Japan, whatever is your regional, let's say, target, you have to engage discussion with those regulatory bodies. It gives you also their expectation, what they would like you basically to bring in terms of clinical data. And that's very important. It's important also to engage, again, we discussed about clinicians engagement before, also in the regulatory process. It's important to keep the relationship with the physicians you have in mind to start the journey, coming from an innovation to an adoption. Those physicians' relationships are very important to maintain over the course until and even beyond your product is available on the market. So it's extremely important for this pre-submission guidance to basically get a feel and like of what those people are expecting. And then accordingly, you will develop and implement with your team of clinicians the right clinical trial, the content. How does the clinical trial will look like to serve basically what the competent authorities are looking for. And also, more importantly, we know how costly are those things now. I mean, since years, but of course, with the new MDR, the situation is not even better. But it's important to understand what could be possibly the relationship between let's say US and Japan, as an example. I have been with a few friends here involved in many projects where it was important to leverage from a clinical trial that could be done, let's say 60% in the US and 40% in Japan, as an example, or the other way around. But again, only if you have had a proper pre-submission guidance from those competent authorities, you will understand better which direction you should take with your group of clinicians.
All right, and that immediately brings us to the
Yes.
next topic on building clinical and economic evidence.
Yeah.
And can you elaborate on health economic studies and how more and more hospitals and doctors want to see not only the clinical evidence but also a health economic study on the products?
Yeah, of course. At the end of the day, clinicians, when you talk to physicians, when you talk to clinicians, what they want to see is clinical data, right? And it's important for them. But clinical data does include, of course, let's say, data that are sensible for the payers. And the payers are the healthcare providers. And of course, for them, dealing with a clinic, dealing with a hospital, they have budget constraints, and this is valid everywhere. I was talking recently to a physician in the US. I mean, those years are over where you think, well, in the US, they have more money, they can do whatever they want. Absolutely not. This person is in charge of 7 different hospitals. She's a cardiologist, that's a she. And she told me, Alain, it's unbelievable, but I have budget constraints that I have to pay attention all the time. So as Marcel said, you come up with the greatest technology. Not only you have, of course, to bring some proof that your device is safe and effective, but on top of that, you have to, let's say, come up with health economic data that will support also the necessity of your device. And by the way, health economic doesn't necessarily have to show that the device itself is less expensive. At the end of the day, it's within the procedure. Let's say if you are coming up, let's take a stupid example. You are coming up with a transcatheter minimally invasive approach versus a surgical technique. It could be more expensive, but on the long run, at the end, it costs less for the hospital because you reduce hospitalization, you reduce the follow-up, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to price, it's not only the cheapest will win the battle. Absolutely not.
Hey, and
So,
Alain, what would be a good moment in time for a company to start working on a health economic study? Because it is overwhelming, the lot of work that you need to do.
yeah.
Should you wait until you're already accessing the market, or should you
No,
start looking at it before?
no, the earlier the better here, of course, because we know that, as you said, I mean, cost effectiveness, it's certainly, as I said, from a priority number one, you need to bring the let's say, effectiveness and safety of your device. But from an health economic standpoint, this is right immediately right after. So you better have to start as early as possible, whether it's going to be included, by the way, within the same trial. When we talk about trial, of course, sometimes we tend to focus on the approval trial like CE mark or FDA approval. I'm talking also about the next step, the next level of studies that could basically be real world evidence studies that we call registries, but are also extremely important. So, of course, it depends on the device we are talking about, but I have in mind, of course, what I've been influenced by the device I've been, let's say, launching the last couple of years. We discussed about all of those clinical data, but it's already very important. You know, sometimes you define a trial, you think it's going to be great, but you have to be very selective on those key opinion leaders you're going to be having with you, because a successful trial, what does that mean? It means if you think about enrollment of 12, 18 months, maximum 24 months, it could be the best trial. But if you see that your enrollment is delayed for whatever reason, then it's going to take 3 to 4 years. It's not going to help at all your launch of your device. So those kind of parameters are extremely important to pay attention with, because a successful trial is a trial which is well designed, which means with a lot of physicians very involved. That's why from the beginning, the earlier the better, also to involve this group of physicians. So you have some sort of a team with you that is accompanying you through the journey of from the R&D to basically the clinical adoption. And as we speak about clinical adoption, what does that mean? It means that once you have the data, whether there are cost effectiveness data or clinical data, they have to be spread out, and the people have to come on the stage. And it's also very important. I have seen so many great devices that failed because, number one, their clinical trials took so long, and basically the benefit was somehow diluted over years, and no one was really willing to speak about it. So these kind of things are very important to keep in
Right.
mind.
Well, in the chat, Lisa is sharing a comment, and thank you for doing that, Lisa. She is stating, "I've seen economic models of ROI calculators get so complex that it scares the sales force from using it. I would just caution that the economic story be good, but simplified for sales representatives to communicate and field questions back from the customer."
Yeah, that's absolutely a good point. That's why health economic value, it's really something to be very specific about your device. You know, it cannot be a copy and paste from a study made with a device A to a device B. That's why, again, very important to start understanding also how the healthcare system providers are thinking. So then you adapt basically accordingly your strategy, defining your trial. But to be honest, I have seen in the past, typically the big mistake is people are making confusion from cost effectiveness to basically uh, how does this improve the quality of life of patient, even though in some device, but these are two different things. So this is part of the complexity when it comes to building the clinical and the economic value from your product. It would take this topic. I agree with Lisa. This topic only, Marcel, would be probably like a few hours discussion, which I really love.
All right. So, well, that also brings us to the next topic on crafting a strong market entry strategy. Um, the regulatory framework that we just discussed, the clinical studies, they all lead to an overall market entry strategy. And in our masterclass on medical device distribution, we teach and talk a lot about defining the landscape, defining your unique sales value, the value proposition, and it comes together in a strong market entry strategy. And part of it is, of course, the reimbursement that you kind of mentioned, Alain. Um, but also in the selection of a distribution network. You need to work with distributors that are knowledgeable about your product, that can speak knowledgeable about your devices and the anatomic application, the clinical application of your device. Um, Alain, what is your take on the combination of your market entry strategy with the distributors that you're working with?
Yeah, and just one additional comment, Marcel, before I jump into this. We talk about um, approval of a product into country A, B, or C with the adequate, basically, regulatory strategy. Reimbursement planning is something totally different. And reimbursement planning is, of course, extremely important to make sure that you're going to be basically facing expectations from, let's say, insurance companies and hospital adoption with your device, with your pricing, and you could have the best of the best device with very solid clinical data. It doesn't mean you're going to bring reimbursement in your country, because in the setting of your clinical trial, if you want to target specific reimbursement. Not every country will have a specific reimbursement for a device, but if you do target one, then it's been already in your design of your clinical trial. You have to think about which competitive product you're going to pick up to make a randomized control trial to show that you are equally good or even better, and then of course accordingly you can ask for a better price. When it comes to sales and distribution strategy, Marcel, whether it's direct sales, whether it's partnership or distributors, you know me. I mean, I don't make any difference between a distributor or direct sales. For me, those are exactly the same. Those are the voice basically of a company. Those are the voice of a device, let's say, in a country. And of course, it's important to have the right distribution network. It's obvious. I mean, why would I say something different? But it's not about having the right one. It's about how you manage those distributors day to day, how you specifically focus on their expectations, on their market dynamics. A country like Germany is not like France, which is not like Italy or Spain. They look pretty much the same. They are in Europe, but at the end of the day, market dynamics are different. As we just discussed, also reimbursement policies could be different. Integration into, let's say, big tenders are different from one country to another one. So it's extremely important to manage distributors in a way that the communication is really up to date and you adjust basically your value proposition according to the country your distributor is facing.
Right. Well, before we dive more into that, because that will be the next topic, let's get back to what you just mentioned about reimbursement. And I'm sharing here the life cycle of the product. What I've seen many companies doing is they have the product registration itself. They call for CE approval. Then they start selling, and they discover somewhere in this commercialization phase, oh, I also want to go to Belgium, and now I have to do the reimbursement registration, which takes another half year or even longer with all the current waiting lines. So that's putting a burden on the whole commercialization phase and delaying the time to market. However, if you do it before here, the load of work that's there for the team without making sales, and that especially goes for a startup, is huge. How would you balance that, Alain? Is that do you put the reimbursement in relation to which markets you target and you have defined already in this very early stage?
Marcel, let's say we can divide the world. The world is vast, of course, and everyone knows that. But if you have a technology A or B, whatever, and you make as we discussed before, your market evaluation first, your market research to understand where are the opportunities with your device. If you define, okay, my device, the biggest market potential in Europe are, let's focus on Europe, is Germany, France, and Italy. Then you have to, and why I'm picking up France in the middle, because France, if the device is implantable, France will require then reimbursement, meaning if you have CE mark, no one cares about your CE mark, you will not be able to sell it. So of course, right from the beginning, in your product development, you have to think about, based on the market research, here are the main countries where the potential with my device is, and in Germany I can get access. Of course, I'm not saying you don't have to bring clinical data, but you do not have necessarily to behave with a target in mind that you will have to bring randomized control trial, which is much more costly for you, and basically you will get access to your market later on. But if France at the end is very important, or Belgium, as you say, you have to think about how should I design my clinical trial. It's going to probably cost you a little bit more, but if you wait and you realize that you have to restart from scratch a study, that is not going to happen, right? So It's a combination of understanding the market needs with the market potential, and it's a company decision to decide. Then at the end, we can completely agree and accept that in some aspect it could be too costly, But then I would say it's the earlier you understand, the earlier you have the good visibility on what are the expectations from market A, B, or C, the better it's going to be for you.
All right. So you mentioned already that distributors and your sales team are the voice of your product, the voice of your company. And that brings us to an important aspect, which is training and educating your stakeholders. And with the training and in our masterclass on medical device distribution, we have a whole lesson on how do you develop three different trainings, because you should train your distributors and your sales force on all the clinical aspects of your product. You should train them on the product specifications, and you should train them on how you position your product against the competitors. So three different trainings where you need a framework that you can utilize to train your sales reps, to train your distributors. But it goes further than that, because certain products also require training for physicians and healthcare practitioners. And when we were preparing this webinar, Alain, you mentioned that in this phase of preparing training, you should also involve your key opinion leaders.
Of course.
Can you
Of course.
talk about that?
Yeah, let me be a little bit provocative here, and that's also the topic of today. It's to be facing the reality of our business. No one could think, okay, I have a medical device, I want to come to the field and I want to inform physician, whoever you are, whether you're a distributor or a direct sales rep, you have to be trained, right? You have to know what you're talking about. It's not going to be enough. You know about your product features. You know which kind of indication your product will address. But I would say that's not going to be enough. What is going to be important is to be trained according to who you're going to be facing. You're going to visit, let me pick up the people that I know the most in this industry are the cardiologists. You go to visit the cardiologists, the cardiac surgeons, a vascular intervention surgeon. You're not going to come to see him and say, well, even though let's assume that you have a Ferrari in your back, the best of the best, pay attention. Who is telling you that the physician is having problems? Otherwise, you're going to be coming to visit this physician and somehow you tell him, oh, you have problem, I'm bringing you the solution. That's not how it works. What is very important is to come up, get to know the person and understand what are the issues eventually is facing with this or this or this indication with this and this and this group of patients. You know what you have in your bag. You know the answer, but you basically ask questions, open up the door, break the ice, and then the physician will tell you, oh, you know what, in this indication, I'm not very happy with the product I have. Wow, this is a beautiful opportunity. And then you put the foot into the door and you slowly start talking about your experience with the device and you build your momentum with the features of your device instead of putting the feature on the table and say, hey, you know what, doctor, you have to use my device because my device is the best. I tell you what, it's not going to work. That's why training seems fairly easy. Everyone understands. Sure, you have to train not only the clinician, not only your team, but that's not enough. It's also how you approach specifically with a certain intuition into the market. And this is valid for, by the way, I talk about cardiology, but this is my domain of
Yes.
I'm passionate for the last 40 years, but it could be any domain, I guess.
Hey, and Alain, we've worked in the past together, and the companies that we worked for, they had an advisory board. And you're a member of several advisory boards as well. Is this what you just mentioned, one of the roles of an advisory board for a company?
Yeah. Alors, advisory board is this is some sort of a topic which is slightly changing if I see how it was 30 years ago and how it is now. It's changing a little bit. My preference would go to involve physicians, clinicians, key opinion leaders. We can discuss forever about what does that mean. You need to have one or two key opinion leaders because, of course, this is never going to change. If your name is known, of course, as a clinician, you come on stage, people will tend to listen to you. That's obvious. My preference has been in the past to also involve, let's say, the level behind or the level below, I would say, of physicians that are sometimes doing twice more or three times more procedures than what those key opinion leaders are doing, but they really know the business. They really know exactly. If you allow my comparison, they used to put the hands in, you know what I mean, in the shit. So they would tell you, oh, pay attention here. They would really help you to streamline and figure out specifically how to position your product. So, and this is how you steer basically the details, and the magnificence of this is like being completely into the pathology, into the clinical indication, to understand every single details and how to basically position yourself there.
Yeah. And Seamus is making a very good comment here in the chat, stating that you should also train your sales team and your distributors on the regulatory requirements and the aspects of your product, as they might need to support you with the registrations. A very valid point, Seamus. Alain,
right.
you're also mentioning developing a proctoring and mentorship programs.
Yeah.
Can you?
It really depends. It varies on your device, but basically the voice of a physician, the voice of a clinician, it's always let's say great, you know. So proctoring, depending again on the complexity, but if you're targeting let's say TAVI or TMDR or any procedures in transcatheter heart valve treatment, as an example of mitral regurgitation, new implant technique, whatever, this is requiring really proctoring. This is requiring specific, and beside that, of course, your proctor will require that you have a clinical specialist team, which are also on top of everything. It's because, of course, on a day-to-day, your clinical specialist team will not only, by the way, we tend to focus, which is, of course, obvious and what needs to be done on the clinicians. But in a cath lab, as an example, there are plenty of physicians that are working with anesthesiologists, with nurses, technicians, and this is a team. They call it heart team. So it's important, basically, to bring the message. Also, proctoring, mentorship program is also very important for the early adopters. And once the early adopters are happy, you have one chance. Never forget. In my humble opinion, when you miss the opportunity to introduce what I've seen, again, in my personal experience, if you miss the opportunity to launch a device in the right way in one country, you're not going to have a second one. Generally speaking, you know, that's how
you don't have a second one in that country, or do you miss it
No,
globally?
you don't have a second one in, you know what I mean. There is always possibilities to return, but if you do mistakes after mistake, physicians will speak to each other and they will say, no, I use this device. It's not exactly what they don't even want to try it, you know. Of course, if your device, as I said before, it's like a Ferrari, even if you are a stupid idiot and you don't present very nicely, physician would tend to go for. But you know what I mean. It's extremely important, again, to build the relationship. And there is nothing better to build your relationship based on a trust. It's a mutual trust. You really need, as a company, the relationship with the clinician, but the clinician, they want to know with who they are working with. They want also to develop the trust. They want to make sure that basically you behave accordingly, because their reputation is at risk as well. So it's important to basically be at the same level. Is that right, Marcel?
Well, yeah, but then if you are the manufacturer, you have contact with a few key opinion leaders, but then your distributors in the various countries around the world also have their own key opinion leaders. How do you balance that? Do you need to balance it?
No, well, it's, you know, as a company, of course, you are in charge of, or you better have to be in charge of the communication you're going to do with your basically clinical data. So you set the program, you involve physician as early as possible, as we just discussed. Even prior, you go to the competent authorities, you define your program, you define your strategy, and you go ahead. You enroll your patients, and you have the clinical data. The clinical data will be presented by your key opinion leaders involved right from the beginning, or let's say the clinician involved right from the beginning. But my best advice is you can always ask a French guy to go to Germany, a German wants that goes to Italy, or a Belgium going to Spain. That works. But after, what works a lot better is you develop in every single country, you develop your own champion. And your own champion in your country will be super happy to also spread the good clinical data. And this is also a way to engage also those physicians at the local level to support your launch.
So as a manufacturer, what you say, you should work closely with your distributor inside that country to find one champion.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
all right.
Absolutely. You know, Marcel, you know, you and I, we've been working enough, and I see plenty of names that we have been working together. You don't learn, and you don't basically prepare a launch if you stay in the office. You know what I mean? So you have to be in the field. You have to be in contact with your distributors. You have to be in contact with your salespeople. You have to be in contact to share the good and the bad stuff with them. You have to live the experience together. And accordingly, you adapt your strategy, your ideas. And it could be that in one country, you have a fantastic junior guy, you know, not a KOL, but that could become a KOL in a few years. It's also part of, let's say, the responsibility or the target, I would say, of a company to prepare the future, having the next generation of key opinion leaders as well.
Right. Hey, and I like how you said you need to go out in the field. You need to be in the arena as a gladiator to present the business. And gladiator's the wrong because it's not a fight, but so you need to be in the field. However, a lot of activities in marketing is now also digital, and um, can you talk about the use of social media and such in the promotion and in being part of the launch strategy to launch a new medical device?
Of course, this is, and anyway, those days, which probably at least the way I've seen it, before the COVID, I'm sure we will have an agreement here. Before the COVID, we tend to do probably stupidly some trips for nothing, or we could have saved some trip. So social media is something you cannot avoid. It's even very, very important to spread up information. The webinars, the professional conference, all those, let's say, video conference are extremely important, either at the local level, at the regional level, or national level. There is no way around. You have to work on that. The marketing material, I mean, those days have to be shared, you know, even on the tender, brochures are not existing anymore. Everything is digital. Yes, it's absolutely important. But the but of the but is there is nothing that will replace. And again, here, when we talk about medical device, what are we talking about? It's the range is so wide and so, but if you have something, a technology which is technical and does require new, we could have made a definition on new, but new, it's really where you're going to be, it's going to be a game changer. If it's a game changer for the physician, I tell you what, sure, you can stay at home and you can do any as many as you want, conference call or visio or whatever, by the way, with your team or with the clinicians. It's not going to work. In my opinion, it's not going to work. You have to create the relationship, because this is something you are in charge of your device. You live with your device. That's the extension of what you think. So you better have to be in the field and to make sure that, as I said before, that you have one chance to convince everyone to use it. So I would tend to encourage people as much as possible to be in the field. And again, because also in a country A versus a country B, expectations could be different.
Right.
So if you think that everyone is the same and all countries are behaving the same, irrespectively of the device or the clinical data benefit you have in your bag, that's not going to be enough to be successful. Absolutely not.
Yeah, and in this webinar, we've talked a lot about launching new devices, but it's not only about new devices like you just mentioned, because the adoption of new technology can take many years. And you were very clear that in our slide deck we should end with the post-launch follow-up, collecting real-world data and look at the feedback user experience. And of course, with the MDR, doing post-market surveillance
Yeah.
is become a crucial element, not only for the manufacturer, but also for the distributor. And in our masterclass, we talk about how you need to make sure that you're covering the responsibility of your distributor with when it comes to post-market
Yeah.
surveillance, when it comes to feedback as well. But you mentioned that it's also an important element of further building the market for a product and growing the market share.
Yeah. No, sure. Look, it depends, of course, on the device or the technology you're talking about. But let's say all the startups we all together have been seeing the last couple of years, generally speaking, they arrive with a version, let's say number one. They plan to go for version number two and eventually a version number three. And how they're going to be going from V1, V2 to V3, it's basically by collecting not only the data, as you said now, the new MDR, it's not about what we want or what we don't want. It's you have to monitor, you have basically on the long run to continue to pop up with clinical data on the long run. But what is, in my humble opinion, extremely important, equally very important for the future of your company is basically together user feedback, understanding what is good with your device right now, but what could possibly be improved in the next iteration of your device. And this is going to be a beautiful, let's say, pipeline for your product portfolio to ensure a long-lasting success story in the future.
Right. So that brings us to the end of the topics that we wanted to discuss in this meeting. And if I can conclude that a well-executed launch strategy transforms an innovative medical device into a widely adopted standard of care. And you have to align the market needs, the regulatory aspects, the clinical validation, and the stakeholder engagement. And if you align those, then companies can successfully navigate all the challenges of commercialization and make a lasting impact on the healthcare industry. Because at the end of the day, we are in the medical device industry because we want to make a difference for patients in the world and to
Yeah.
really help them with a higher level of well-being. So,
Marcel, I would add one word is all what we have been sharing, and thank you for the audience today. That was great to have all of you with us. First of all, and again, I think I said that before, I'm not pretending that I'm right. What I pretend is just that I'm sharing what I've experienced myself. And what I've experienced sometimes is I have seen companies failing, not because they had bad devices. I have seen companies failing, not because they had bad clinical data, but because they did not plan for their success. And it's extremely important to have a very solid execution. All what we have been saying and we share together today is somehow we did not reinvent the wheel, right? You all know exactly. But the biggest challenge of many startups I have seen is to do things what you have a plan, but are you going to basically execute according to the plan, or are you changing the plan? Oh no, I don't think so, it's going to be that important. No, if you want really to have a successful launch, you have to plan for your success and you have to execute it.
right, thank you. So, Alain, if people in the audience,
Sure.
where can they find you? If they want to learn more from you, maybe learn what it takes to set up an advisory board or bring on an advisor with the kind of
Absolutely. Yeah,
experience
I
that you
think it's
have.
easy on LinkedIn to find my blue eyes.
Okay, I will share that in the notes to you all the link to Alain and in our masterclass medical device distribution, we train students on how to establish and grow a distributor network. And what you will learn is how to find the best distributors in each country, how to turn distributors into raving fans that will actively promote and sell your products in the market, how to protect your business from underperforming distributors, and how to measure, monitor, and grow your distributors' sales. That's what we teach you in 6 modules in our masterclass, which you can follow online, which you can follow on your mobile or your phone, and in online training sessions that we arrange. And For all the attendees, we have a special offer to do a free distributor assessment call with me, and you can find the link in the chat. Emma will share that right now. So thank you all for attending. We will stop the recording now, and then we move to the Q&A session. So let me stop the recording.